Welcome to the Design for Living Big Book Study. Bill and I will be sharing our own experience of how the book has helped us in the removal of our DOC, or actually our substance of no choice. But more importantly, how the directions contained within the big book have helped change all aspects of our lives. We will share our pain and successes as it relates to our own journey and the 100s of men and women that we have had the pleasure of helping through sponsorship or otherwise. Bill, myself, or the THEUDRCAST, we're not affiliated with any 12-step program, and we neither endorse nor discredit any method of recovery. We are supportive of all paths to recovery. We're just passionate about what worked for us. The opinions shared in this study are solely that of the person that is sharing them, okay? So with that, let's get on with it. In the 12 by 12, yeah, that's correct. Everyone on Zoom, that's page 45 in the 12 by 12. I think at the bottom of the page, we also clutch.
Yeah. So just to kind of qualify a few things, because there's a lot of new people here. So as we've gone through the material, and we started this in November, and we're now in March. So we've gone through a lot of the material in the big book, and really where we are in the big book is we're on step 6. Okay, what we're doing is using the 12 and 12. And some pieces of the literature in the 12 and 12 to enhance step 6. And why is that so important? Because as we learn that we are powerless over our first drink or our first drug, and once we put it in our body, we will, and we don't actually choose to do that, so we don't have the choice of our substance. Our substance chooses us at a certain point with a real alcoholic addict, and we are rendered powerless. And so anything short of a personality change or changing how we think and how we act in life, you know, the ideas, emotions, and attitudes that have been the guiding forces of the lives of these men, anything short of like exposing how we are and then trying to change that, we'll probably fucking drink again. Because the mind that needs the relief from the drugs and alcohol, it will always seek the same path of relief, and for us it's drugs and alcohol. So we need to change how our mind works so that it doesn't go down that path anymore. So why is step 6 so important, and why are we spending so much time on step 6? Because step 6 is where we try. This is where we try to identify what it is that's fucking our lives over and try to change it with the help of God. Because we just couldn't change it on our own, so we have to try to bring God into like the changing or creator or higher power or whatever the hell you want to call that power that can change your life. And so that's why we're spending so much time on this defect of character is what it's called in the 12-step programs, because unless we see it and acknowledge it, then we can't change it. So we're trying to look at it, and we're given many examples of that through this literature that we're reading today in the step 4, actually, even though we're on step 6.
And the reason we're at step 4 is because we've recognized that we are powerless over our instincts, because we over-exaggerate or underdevelop our instincts. And where do we find talk about instincts in this 12 by 12 is in step 4. That's where we start recognizing our instincts gone astray. And that is where we start to see that we are just as powerless. So I don't have drugs and alcohol anymore, but my brain and my character still wants to go to relief. It wants to go to the action of make me feel better than I feel right now. So I use all sorts of things in early recovery, sex and gambling and cigarettes and flirting with people and, you know, and money, making money, going to the gym. It's all, you know, it can all be healthy stuff, but when over exaggerated by people like us, it becomes hazardous to our health. And so step 6 becomes very, very, very important to recognize that I need to find a different path. I need to start finding a willingness to work at being a better human being. and not avoiding pain all the time. I need to go through pain. I need to feel pain. I need to recognize what the pain is teaching me. That's why we're back at 4, because it talks all about this.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, let's go.
All right. We also clutch at another wonderful excuse for avoiding an inventory. Avoiding pain, if you will, right? Our present anxieties and troubles, we cry, are caused by the behavior of other people. People who really need a moral inventory. We firmly believe that if only they'd treat us better, we'd be all right. What does that sound like to everyone? I feel like we talked about this last week. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Does that remind you of step 3 in the big book? When it talks about, you know, the man that tries to put everyone where he wants them, and if they'd only do better, everything would be wonderful. And yet he steps on the toes of his fellows, and only for them to eventually want to get what they want to get out of life. And so then they retaliate, and he gets harmed. But isn't this, it goes on to say in the big book, isn't this just of your own making? See, I'm not a word-for-word guy like this, so please don't ever expect that from me. But you get the gist, right? That's starting to sound like that, right? It's because we're still trying to will ourselves to success. We're still running life on our own wills. Other people can do the moral inventory stuff. So anyway, therefore we think our indignation, does everyone know what indignation means? I'm indignant to it. I don't care for it, and you're not going to convince me otherwise, okay? Our indignation is justified and reasonable, I think. That our resentments are the right kind. We aren't the guilty ones, they are. So it talks about that in step 4 and how it works, right? Justifiable anger is not a luxury. It's a dubious luxury that I cannot afford because it'll kill me. At this stage of the inventory proceedings, our sponsors come to the rescue. They can do this, for they are the carriers of AA's tested experience with step 4. They comfort the melancholy one by first showing him that this case is not strange or different, that his character defects are probably not more numerous or worse than those of anyone else in AA. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a 12-step member. It doesn't have to be your sponsor. It can be our pillars that we talk to. It can be our friends that are 12-stepped, working recovery, trying to be better humans, striving for perfection every day, knowing we won't ever reach it. Melancholy, I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of poor me kind of thing, isn't it? Yeah. It's kind of like that. Yeah. But anyway, a 12-step member that can help see where we are in self, right? Because self is always at the root of our problems. And it often takes another 12-step member to be able to right-size me, to help me recognize where I am. For me, you might laugh at this, but my biggest defect that keeps coming up and I have the hardest time recognizing is self-pity. Poor me. And I'll tell you something, 10 years ago, you would have told me that I was wallowing in self-pity. I'd have knocked you the fuck out, right? Because that is such an insult. And when I started working this program and I started recognizing that that's my go-to, man, I was disgusted with myself for a while. But it was a great lesson to learn. You coming in? Come on in, bud. Grab a seat. You're more than welcome.
Someone hook him up.
Yeah, show us.
Welcome.
Grab a chair beside JR there, bud. What's your name? Jaime? Nice to meet you. Welcome. Grab a coffee and a donut if you want, okay? All right. So everyone gets what I'm saying, right? We got to strive for better. We got to strive for better. And sometimes I can't see what I'm doing wrong, so it takes that sponsor to come in and say, dude, you're feeling sorry for yourself. Do you see what's going on here? Let's look at this. Let's find out what fear you're acting out in, because it's almost always, I would say it's always a fear. Anyway, I'll move on. This, the sponsor promptly proves by talking freely and easily and without exhibitionism. In other words, he's not being arrogant. He's not giving me lectures. He's not being grandiose and making me feel small. We're just talking. He's talking about his own defects, past and present, which I think is nice. My sponsor does that for me. He doesn't actually say, Gord, you're being selfish and self-pitying yourself. He starts to talk about himself, and it makes me look at how I'm behaving. And I'm not sure I've mastered that yet, but, I'm working on it. This, the sponsor promptly proves by talking freely, easily, without exhibitionism, about his own defects, past and present. This calm, yet realistic stock taking is immensely reassuring. Why would it be reassuring? To me, who's having to recognize that I'm acting out in defects of character, why would him telling me about his be reassuring? Exactly. I'm not alone, and I am certainly not at all unique. The sponsor probably points out that the newcomer has some assets which can be noted along with his liabilities. Okay. When I'm sponsoring, I don't always point out the assets, because sometimes I know for me, I need to feel it. And I need to feel like a dirtbag, or a whiny bitch, or whatever it is. Please excuse my expressions. Yeah. Now I'm going to feel sorry for myself that he said that. But you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I need to get in that. I need to feel the pain. So I don't always give them their assets, but sometimes I know a guy needs it, and I do. As soon as he begins, this tends to clear away morbidity and encourage balance, which is nice, because it is important. We've talked about this. It is important to recognize the good in ourselves and the progress that we're making, the effort that it takes to be a better human being. It's important to recognize that trying is important, and it should be rewarded. It should be celebrated, like the beginning of step 6, right? Without any reservations whatsoever, working repeatedly on step 6. Repeatedly. So that means he's not getting it right every time. Repeatedly working the willingness of step 6 on all his faults without any reservations whatsoever has indeed come a long way spiritually, and is therefore entitled to be called a man who is sincerely trying to grow in the image and likeness of his own Creator. It's important to recognize that we're trying to do that. This is a lifetime job. So a pat on the back once in a while isn't too bad, right? It sort of reassures us that we're on the right path. Okay. As soon as he begins to be more objective, the newcomer can fearlessly, rather than fearfully, look at his own defects. The sponsors of those who feel they need no inventory are confronted with quite another problem. This is because people who are driven by pride of self unconsciously blind themselves to their liabilities. So they're driven by pride of self unconsciously. They're blind themselves to their liabilities. These nukes say they don't think they have any defects. I'm a pretty nice guy. I think I remember you saying that at one point, JR. But, it's cool because it's gross, right? Look at you now. These newcomers scarcely need comforting. The problem is to help them discover a chink in the walls of their ego has built through which the light of reason can shine. I like how Bill says it. He drops bombs in people's lives. He just drops little bombs. And I'll let him explain that more. And later, it creates an opening where they're like, oh, shit. That's what he was talking about. Damn, he was right. You know, it's important to recognize that. And sometimes it's hard to get through to people. But that's what we try to do. First off, they can be told that the majority of AA members have suffered severely from self-justification during their drinking days. For most of us, self-justification was the maker of excuses. Excuses, of course, for drinking and for all kinds of crazy and damaging conduct. We had made the imitation of alibis a fine art. We had to drink because times were hard or times were good. We had to drink because at home we were smothered with love or we got none at all. We had to drink because at work we were great successes or dismal failures. We had to drink because our nation had won a war or lost a peace. And so it went ad infinitum. So in other words, we made these excuses, no matter how trivial, so that we could drink. So it's pretty obvious that we need to stop making excuses for our behavior as well, or we're never going to change. And if we don't change, we go back to drinking. And to go back to drinking means death for most of us. Certainly does for me.
I just want to add,
Please.
as you're talking about like making excuses for our behavior, often I will say, you know, alcoholics can rationalize and justify the most errant nonsense to suit their actions or their inaction. So we'll justify our unbehavior of doing nothing, which is also an action of doing nothing, which doesn't help either, right? You know, I know Leanne had asked for a description on under-exaggerated defect on Zoom. What's an example of an under-exaggerated defect? So if the baseline of a defect is like balance, where it's good, everything's like good with it, using it over above would be exaggerated, but I guess under-exaggerated would also just be exaggerated just in the negative, right? It's almost like if you're balanced and you have a good way of like navigating life and you're assertive when you need to, and then you know how to keep your mouth shut when you need to, that balance really gets you far. But if you always go to the lesser, where you won't speak up for yourself, yeah, or you wallow in emotionalism and fucking just feel like the world's treating you badly and you don't take any action, then that's under-exaggerated, or I'll say an over-exaggerated, but in the negative, right? We talked about pride in reverse. Like, what's pride in reverse? Pride on the top end is like, you know, being over ego, like overbearing, and like, look at me, look at my truck, look at this, look at whatever, right? And it could be many different things. And under it is like, look, I'm not good enough, like I don't have this and I can't do anything or whatever, right? So there's no balance in that. And that's also just as destructive as the other. And so as we try to like drop bombs or plant little seeds, like it's also about taking the right actions, because no action is also an action. And if it's not conducive to like moving forward, then it fucking hurts you, right? So that's just another little piece that I wanted to add.
Excellent. Yeah, I didn't know that question was asked, so it's a great question, because I love a lot of people say, like I said earlier, that Bill W. is an excellent writer, so he just used different words to describe defects or shortcomings, right? But I don't believe that anymore. I've done some more reading. Like I mentioned that book, Dark Side of the Light Chasers, by Debbie Ford last week, and she talks, and also the Ripple Effect I talked about. Great books. And I believe that the defects are over-exaggeration, just to clarify, of instincts, of our natural God-given instincts, okay? And a shortcoming, this is just my belief, again, shortcomings are underdeveloped instincts, right? So, like Bill said, if I want to be successful, that's the instinct. Everyone has an instinct to succeed and go on. but I can be arrogant or angry and start fights, and I have a major defect of character in being a control freak, and not treating people properly, not as God wanted me to have a natural instinct to succeed. And the shortcoming of that is like he mentioned, we become timid. We retract into ourselves because we don't want to be the center. We don't want to speak out and improve our lives. So that's an underdevelopment, right, of an instinct. Yeah.
I have a totally different take on that. And we'll get into that in step 7.
Okay.
Here's what I think. So I should, because we don't want to confuse you, but Gord and I have different opinions of the literature, right? So he just gave you his. So mine is, even though Gord talked about the underdeveloped instinct, which can cause us pain, also, to me, that's still a defect. To me, a defect is any part of the ego in operation. And the ego is EGO, which is the acronym, and it stands for edging God out. And if it's any thought or action that has a motive of fear. So to me, it's any thought or action. So the defect doesn't even have to be the actual behavior. It can be the thought in your mind that I'm not worth it. That guy's a piece of shit. I'd like to blah, blah, blah her, or I'd like to punch that guy out, or whatever. Like, those are all fear-based thoughts, which is the ego. So it doesn't even have to be an actual behavior that you see. It can be a thought or action with the motivation of fear. But you won't know that the motivation of fear is there unless you inventory it or you get good at identifying self. So to me, all of those are defects of character. So where it switches is when you really want to do better and you really want to walk in the image and likeness of your creator. And like, you may make the mistake and it looks like the defect, but the shift in your mind and your being to want to change, that's the difference between a defect and a shortcoming. So I use the defect and not really willing to change it yet, but if I'm really willing to change it and the defect still comes out, I fall short. And it's a shortcoming, but my mindset has changed on what I'm actually doing in my life. Does that make sense? To me, that's what a shortcoming is I fall short, even though I've surrendered to my creator to be the best version I can, and I fall short. And when you get to that point, you actually don't beat yourself up anymore. But when you fall short in your defective character, you're still beating yourself with the club of self-hate, right? And somebody else can say something to you about that defect and you beat yourself up and you feel bad because of what they said. But once you're on the other side, somebody can say something about whatever it was you did and you're like, it's okay, man, I'm trying and I made a mistake and that's okay. To me, that's what a shortcoming is.
I like that, Bill. I think you've just changed my mind. That's pretty cool, right? I mean, like, think about it. It's more positive. What he's saying is more positive.
Well, when you look at step 6 and 7, we talk about defects in step 6, but we talk about shortcomings in 7. 7 is a full surrender to God step, right? It's a full surrender. Like there's a position where it changes, right?
Yeah.
So to me, they're quite different steps, right? One is I'm still operating in self and not really willing to give it up, but I'm going to try. And then 7 is I've surrendered and I may still screw it up, but that's okay because I'm on this different path. And because the steps are so different, that's what makes me think that, right?
So we fall short when we're trying to do better. I like that. It's the mechanics work. You know what I mean? The mechanics work better. Thanks, bro.
Yeah.
Love your body. Yeah. That's why I love doing this with him. That's really good stuff, right?
And you'll really see that in the 7 literature. Like, it's going to come out. What I just said in the 7 literature, the 7 literature is the most fucking amazing literature there is. And like, when we get there, which will be very soon, you're going to see like exactly kind of what we've been talking about and what I said in live action through the literature. It's amazing literature, man.
Yeah. I love this thing. I love that. This is why I do this with him, because, I pray when I smudge, I pray to see, and I pray to hear, and I pray for what I say, and I pray for my heart to be open to new things. And when I do that, it's amazing what God gives me through people. And usually, my friend here has some good insights. So I love that. Thank you, bud.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on with all this kissy, huggy bullshit. Now, we thought conditions drove us to drink, and when we tried to correct these conditions and found that we couldn't to our entire satisfaction, our drinking went out of hand and we became alcoholics. It never occurred to us that we needed to change ourselves to meet conditions, whatever they are.
Did he start in the right spot? Okay.
Absolutely did. Ad infinitum. But in AA, we slowly learned that something had to be done about our vengeful resentments, self-pity, and unwarranted pride. We had to see that every time we played the big shot, we turned people against us. We had to see that when we harbored grudges and planned revenge for such defeats, we were really beating ourselves with the club of anger we had intended to use on others. We learned that if we were seriously disturbed, our first need was to quiet that disturbance, regardless of who or what we thought caused it. To see how erratic emotions victimized us often took a long time. We could perceive them quickly in others, but only slowly in ourselves. And that is why it is so important to have some good quality people in your life, right? That is why guys like us talk about pillars. That's why guys like us sponsor guys, and we stay with the guys that got through the steps and grow friendships with those guys so that we can stay in this club, this thing that we do together. It's important. It's important to stay together. Like-minded people. Surround yourself with positive people, and you can't help but be positive. Even in business, I surround myself with people that are smarter and more successful than I am, because I have to lift myself to their level to be there with them. They make me better. First of all, we had to admit that we had many of these defects, even though such disclosures were painful and humiliating. Where other people were concerned, we had to drop the word blame from our speech and thought. In other words, I had to stop blaming everything and everybody other than me for my hardships and my behavior. And at step 6, when I start recognizing, at steps 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, when I start trying to be a better human being, if I continue to blame others for my behavior, like when I finger that guy in traffic, when I give that guy the finger in traffic. Oh, you young people.
Sometimes quickly, sometimes
slowly, yeah. But when I give that guy the finger in traffic, God damn, I don't even know how to say it anymore. It's not his fault for driving like an asshole. It's my fault for being impatient, for not having left in time, for driving too quickly, for getting angry. It's all a me problem. It has nothing to do with the guy that just cut me off, or very little to do, because some people are just idiots. But I'm kidding, though. This required great willingness, even to begin. It requires a tremendous amount of willingness to start looking at ourselves and dropping the blame game. Because I have spent 44 years before I sobered up trying to blame everybody else for my problems. It's going to take a lot of willingness and a lot of work. This required great willingness. But once over the first 2 or 3 hurdles, the course ahead began to look easier, for we had started to get perspective on ourselves, which is another way of saying that we were gaining in humility. I think we probably stopped there.
Okay, I'm going to go back a little bit and just touch on a couple things that Gord had read. So right at the beginning on 45 where he started, there's one piece that I highlighted. We also clutch at another wonderful excuse for avoiding inventory. Our present anxieties and troubles are caused by the behavior of other people. Like when you look at general like life and people in general, almost all of their problems are created by somebody else. It's always somebody else's fault. It's the government's fault, or it's the fucking city's fault, or it's the, it's the teacher's fault, or it's the ex-husband's fault, or it's the ex-wife's fault, or it's the kid's fault, or my friend's fault, or those assholes, whoever. Like our whole society thrives on blame. And you can go on Facebook and you can find it on probably every second post. Somebody's blaming somebody about their life and why their life is shitty, right? But what we do in recovery is we look at ourselves and we take our own responsibility for everything that we do and we think, which takes a bit of work, right? Of course it takes work, but we have to stop that. And the line that we just read on page 47 at the very bottom, I'll read that one and kind of flip around a little bit here. 47, bottom of the page. To see how erratic emotions victimized us often took a long time, it says. And think about that. Think about when something happens in your life and how your feelings go and the emotions kick in and then you're the victim, right? We're always the victim. Oh shit, that happened, right? And whatever it might be, okay? We could perceive them quickly in others and think about that. You can always see somebody else losing their mind, freaking out. It's like, whoa, settle down, man. But to see it in ourselves, it's a different story because it matters to us, but it matters to them too. Right? But it's the erratic emotions that come up. And it's almost always because you're thinking you're losing something or you're not getting something you want. What are you losing? You losing money? You losing emotional security? Are you losing your companionship? It's always from the instincts. What are you losing? Or what are you not getting? You're not getting the love that you want. You're not getting the respect that you want. You're not getting. It's always one of those things, which creates the anxiety, creates the emotion, and then we're victims. And it takes us a long time to see that. And like, this is kind of why I do the studies, because most people in program and in the world, but I'm kind of focused on 12-step recovery here, they still do this stuff. They still blame other people. They still like are the victims. They're still, I'm going to practice compassion. I'm going to forgive them. But they don't really forgive them and they can't really practice compassion because they're self-willing the principles into their life. Actually, what they're doing is they're resisting the forgiveness. And so they think that they're forgiving and they want to be forgiving, but the reality is it takes a long fucking time to ever forgive because that process is based in resistance, okay? So we could perceive them quickly in others, but only slowly in ourselves. First of all, boom, here's some direction. We had to admit that we had many of these defects. How do we even admit that we have some of them? Well, through the inventory process of 12-step recovery, but Gord had nailed it earlier. Like God-centered 12-step people. People that care more about my life than my feelings. That are able to call me on how I am, what I'm thinking, and what I'm doing in my life. And if I don't listen to those people who care about my life, I will push them away and I'll keep doing what I've always done and I get what I always got, but it always gets worse. It never gets better. So we have to let down the walls of the pride and the sensitivity and the ego and be able to trust a few people to be able to call us on our shit. And And that's really hard to do, and it takes practice, right? But it's necessary, right? The thing about our lives, and most of our lives, is we've already taught everybody how to treat us. And we've already taught them how we're treating them. So our families and whatnot, they're already trained and conditioned how we are and how they are and how the interactions go. So like, let's say for me when I was younger and I was like a heavy alcoholic and I didn't really listen to my mom and I just did whatever I wanted. Eventually she had to cater to that because she loved me and she wouldn't kick me out. So she had to cater to the way that I was and do things that way. And basically what she's doing by not kicking me out and not saying anything, she wouldn't actually talk to me. She was mad at me, but she wouldn't do anything, is I've just trained her how to like actually treat me. So I'm teaching her. But if she would have stood up to me and said, I'm not going to put up with that, you got to get the fuck out of here and don't talk to me until you've gotten some help. And then what? Now I'm left to my own on the streets, and maybe I'm going to smarten up at that point, or maybe I don't, right? So with our family, they're often the ones who will co-sign our shit the most, whether it be good or bad. And then every time my mom would come to me and say something, if she did, she would say it like angrily. So as soon as she baited me with the pride, here's her pride, saying it in like a fearful energy, I fucking just fire back. So it's just like two people, force on force, right? So everything's energy. So for every action or movement, there's actually an opposite and equal reaction. And that's the same with words. So every time you say something in a prideful way, you're actually baiting, and they're going to respond in pride back to you. But if you start learning how to like respond in a good way, and say things in a kind and loving way, which takes practice, they can't really respond to you in the way that creates more carnage, right? Okay, and so on that paragraph still, first of all, we had to admit we had many of these defects, even though such disclosures were fucking painful and humiliating. Well, that's humility, man. We have to have pain and humiliation in some level of the humility, or we don't grow out of it. So me acknowledging certain character defects or certain ways that I was, it was very humiliating because my pride didn't actually want to be like that, right? So I had to kind of learn that that's what I am. Holy shit, that sucks. But once I acknowledge it, it's kind of like when you admit you're an alcoholic or an addict, you had to concede to your innermost self that you were an alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. This is almost the exact same thing. I had to concede to myself that I have major anger issues, or I have major abandonment issues, or I have major judgment issues against the opposite sex, and I really think they're not equal. When I never really looked at it that deep. Right? But looking at that going, fuck, man, my mom didn't teach me to be like that. And that's kind of humiliating. I would never have acknowledged that if I didn't have like a good sponsor, somebody like helping me through that. Right? So it's painful and it's humiliating. And whatever your defects are, where other people were concerned, we had to drop the word blame from our speech and thought. Well, you can drop it from your speech maybe at first, but it doesn't mean that it's gone anywhere. So how do you drop it from your thought? Probably by you trying to will it away and just not say anything. You actually create more suppression and repression of the negative energy, and eventually it's going to blow up. So that's not going to work. So how do we get it out of our thought? Well, we got to look at it differently. We got to look at our inventory through a 4. We got to look at other people to go, holy shit, my mom really tried her best. My mom went through all that stuff. Holy shit, my mom grew up in those times. My mom had 13 brothers and sisters. Man, she was probably raised by her brothers and sisters. She didn't even probably have much time with her mom. And here I am like blaming my mom for not giving me any love. Well, she probably didn't get any from her parents because she had 13 brothers and sisters. How much love goes around there? And my grandpa was an alcoholic and he wasn't even around. So everyone relies on my grandma, right? And here I am bitching about it. And I have no need to bitch anymore. And I start seeing it differently. And what's that? That's the spiritual experience. It's part of a personality change that changes the way that I see things, ideas, emotions, and attitudes that have been the guiding force of my life. I start to see, holy shit, that's been pushing my whole life, this resentment and the way that I see like my mom, and then I judge other women. Like there's so many things that can tie into some of these things when we see the truth of them, right? So this required what? Great willingness. Like to get to that point of like really acknowledging and facing that pain, it takes some serious willingness, man. Like typically you run from pain and problems as from the plague. This takes like so much willingness that you're willing to face the pain and the problem, and you know it's gonna fucking hurt. But you hopefully believe what the person said and said on the other side of that, there's relief. But there's no fucking proof, man. There's no proof in that. And so it's almost like a leap of faith. And how you get that like willingness is typically you burn your life down enough times, you fuck it up enough times, you fucking get to the bottom of the pit enough times, and you've been told this many times, but you got nothing left, right? And like going back to some of the old literature, we've been crushed by our own self-imposed crisis that we could no longer postpone or evade. You finally get crushed by your own defect to a point where you can't postpone and evade it. You can't hide it anymore. And nor do you want to, because now you finally hit this bottom where you want to change. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And it's still a leap of faith, right? So previous page, going up middle of the page, this calm yet realistic stock taking is immensely reassuring. The sponsor probably points out that the newcomer has some assets which can be noted along with his liabilities. This tends to clear away the morbidity, encourage balance, and soon begins to be more objective. The newcomer can fearlessly face rather than fearfully look at his own defect. So working with other people and finding the balance of how to navigate that, because some people are so depressive, you have to like give them like the bone to chew on and show them some good stuff about themselves. And like talking about like everybody has their defects, and sharing my own, like Gord talked about, sharing our own defects gives them the validity that, okay, I can do this. And so a sponsor will do a little bit of a balancing act, but I'm like with Gord, like the book talks about the main literature in the big book, it says we're to be hard on ourselves. So that's really important. If I'm too light on myself, then I never really make a proper amend, and I never really want to change, and I won't change. So I got to be hard on myself to some degree. And so I got to be hard on the person I'm working with too. But on a depressive side, I got to be a little different. But on the ego side, I can be super hard on them, right? Next paragraph. Most of the paragraph down. The problem is to help them discover the chink in the walls their ego has built, which the light of reason can shine. So think about this. Think about your ego is like a concrete wall inside of you, okay? So your ego is always trying to protect you. It's trying to not let you get hurt. So it's like your pride, and it's your fear, and it's your judgment, it's your unwillingness to be vulnerable. It's all these things, maybe you were abused a bit, and so you put these defense mechanisms where you disassociate. So all of these things become the concrete. And so as we start this work, we start chipping that. Imagine those little pointed hammers. They're chipping hammer, they're pointy hammers. And you start chipping a concrete wall. And as soon as you start chipping a concrete wall with a chipping hammer, it just goes ding, ding, ding. Nothing happens. It's like, fuck, this is going to be a hard, long go to get through this wall. But the thing about it is if you keep chipping the exact same spot, you start creating a little divot, right? And that divot starts turning into a bigger divot. And as you kind of start rounding out that divot, now the hole is kind of going into the back of the wall. Eventually, if you keep chipping on this concrete through the divot, when you finally break through that concrete, you kind of bust a bunch of chips. And then as you bust, now you're busting the chips, like bigger pieces of concrete kind of fly off on the other side where it's dark. But that light of reason starts shining through where the dark was. And that little bit of light actually lights up a lot of the dark, right? But it takes time to chip. And you stop chipping, man, you don't get better. Right? You don't undo the knots of self. So what blocks knots of self is not doing the work, getting into relationships too early, and not doing inventory in the things, right? Because that light that shines in the dark actually illuminates a lot. And the more that you keep chipping, eventually, like it's all light in there. And then you just want to keep going because that light's so beautiful and amazing. Okay, the last thing I'll finish with is on 47, second paragraph. We thought conditions drove us to drink. And when we tried to correct these conditions and found that we could not to our entire satisfaction, so every one of us has said, I drink because of whatever the condition, okay? For me, I drank because I'm Native. I drank because I'm not Native enough. I'm drank because I'm too Native. I drank because I grew up in Ogden. I drank because all my buddies did. Like, I would drink, dude, I just drank, right? That's just the way that it was. And I didn't know when I was drinking that I was going to become alcoholic or an addict. I didn't know that that was going to happen. But I like the effect produced by alcohol and drugs. I like that it helped me when I was a young teenager. I got laid on it my first time, whatever. It did certain things all through my journey of life. Drugs and alcohol, I like the effect that it produced. And I don't mean it was always a euphoric effect. I mean that later in my life, it actually blotted out any feelings I fucking had. And I like that effect because I didn't want feelings. So I like the effect produced by alcohol at any given time, right? And when we tried to correct these conditions, so I always tried to correct it with money and with stuff and with houses and with trucks, but it never worked, or move or whatever, but it doesn't work, right? To our entire satisfaction, our drinking went out of hand, we became alcoholics. Here it is. We never occurred to us that we need to change ourselves to meet the conditions, whatever they fucking were. So it's funny when Gord was praying and he was saying how terrible the world is right now. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that it's pretty terrible out there in a way. But I don't watch the news. Like I was out with Jesse last night, my buddy, he's getting married. He's all about politics. And his buddies, there's only 5 of us and they're all into politics. I was just sitting there going, what the fuck are they talking about? He's like, what's your take? I'm like, bro, I don't fucking know. I don't know what's going on. But they're like arguing in this like rich steakhouse. I couldn't even wear a hat. I had to wear a collared shirt. And like they're all arguing. We're the loudest guys in there. We're not even drunk. And I'm just like, I don't even know what's going on. Because I don't let, and I'm not saying that it's not important, and maybe it's important to you to keep up on those things, but I don't worry about that. I don't need that in my head. It gives me alcoholism, man. Makes me feel restless and irritable and discontent, and I don't want that. And I really believe, like, for me, where I put my focus is on the person that I'm trying to help. It's all I can really do anyway. And I believe the more people that wake up in the world, the better chance we have at changing it. The more people that are sleeping, the less chance we have at changing it. So I didn't even relate to what those guys were talking about, and I wasn't mad at anyone, Trump or the government or anybody, because I don't even know what's happening. And like, call me stupid or fucking uninterested more like, because I just don't have the interest of that. I'd rather try to help somebody wake up so that maybe they're a catalyst to like help change, right? So
and to take that one step further, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I also don't watch the news, but I do have social media. And I try really hard on all repeatedly step 6, right? And all my affairs, I try really hard to scroll past all that stuff. Every once in a while, something will catch my eye, like this story about Wayne Gretzky being a traitor and blah, blah, blah. And they want to change the name of Wayne Gretzky Drive in Edmonton. And I had to put my 2 cents in there. And all I said was, I can't believe people are worried about the name of a drive in Edmonton as opposed to being held hostage by our government in our own country, right? And I could be completely wrong because I really don't know. I've been proven wrong so many times, but I just had the need to say that. And guess what? It caused me all sorts of shit. I fell for it. I acted out in my defects of character, ego, thought I knew what I was talking about, thought I would, and that was on somebody that I serve on a board of directors with for an insurance-related thing. I serve on 3 different boards of directors. One of them is, they're all charitable funds, but I had to apologize, and here's the kicker. The technology ended up embarrassing me one more time. Because at the beginning of that meeting, what I didn't know is someone had already started an AI, a note-taking, a minutes-taking function. And I received it in the email today. And the first thing on it is, Gord apologized for his behavior on a post regarding blah, 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 and rah, rah, rah. And everyone on the board of directors gets to read that shit. So I needed to be humiliated to recognize my defects, right? And I'd already recognized it, but God needed me to be just a little more humiliated so that I don't do that shit anymore, right? We could talk about this for hours. Like, it's tough. We got to just keep trying, right?
Yeah.
Just trying.
Okay, let's take a break.
We'll get back to the podcast in a second. The opinions expressed on this podcast are solely of the guest sharing or myself. We have no affiliation with any 12-step or recovery program. And if you do like our work, please consider visiting BILLWARDLIFE and supporting what we do. Now back to the podcast.
Okay, here I go. So we're going to start at the 3 lines down on page 48. I'm going to read a fair amount, and then we'll kind of go back to it, and I'm trying to get this chapter done tonight. Okay, of course, the depressive and the power driver are personality extremes. So I kind of talked about that, the 2 types, right? The depressive or the power driver. Types of which AA and the whole world abound. Often these personalities are just as sharply defined as the examples given. But just as often, some of us will fit more or less into both classifications. Human beings are never quite alike, so each of us, when making an inventory, will need to determine what his individual character defects are. So that's really important in doing the 4. You get to see what your character defects are. What stock in trade are you trading with the world that isn't serving you or them? Are you over dominating and try to control everybody? Or are you under dominating and you get controlled and you never get to say what you actually mean? Or whatever it might be. Having found the shoes that fit, he ought to step into them and walk with new confidence. There's almost like a relief and a confidence to find out what's actually wrong with us. Right? And once you kind of start learning about what's wrong with you and what's right with you, it allows you to walk with a straighter back and be able to look people in the eye. That he is at last on the right track. Let's ponder the need for a list of the more glaring personality traits all of us have in varying degrees. To those having religious training, such a list would set forth serious violation of moral principles. Some others will think of this list as defects of character. Still others will call it an index of maladjustments. Some will be quite annoyed if there's talk about immorality, let alone sin. But all who are at least reasonable will agree upon one point, that there is plenty wrong with us alcoholics, about which plenty will have to be done if we are going to expect sobriety. progress, and any real ability to cope with life. I'm just going to reread that. But all who are at least reasonable will agree upon one point, that there is plenty wrong with us alcoholics, about which plenty will have to be done if we expect sobriety, first and foremost, progress, and any real ability to cope with life. Look how he wrote that. Any real ability to cope with life. That's what we're looking for. To avoid falling into confusion over the names these defects should be called, let's take a universally recognized list of the major human failings. The 7 deadly sins of pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, and sloth. It is not by accident that pride heads the procession. Pride's always at the front of this, man. Whether it's pride in reverse or it's pride on the other side, on the top side. For pride leading to self-justification and always spurred by conscious and unconscious fears. So when I talked about the ego, so my version, when I say pride in the program, most of my life I grew up with the word pride, meaning like I feel good about myself and I have pride in myself. My whole version of that shifted in recovery. To me, pride is actually the ego. And what it's saying here is pride leading to self-justification. So I'm going to rationalize and justify my actions or my inaction, and I'm always going to be right in whatever it is that I think, and always spurred by conscious and unconscious fears. So some of the fears that our pride lives on, or the ego lives on, it is conscious. And you might be able to see it. But sometimes you think that you're doing the right thing, but it's actually an unconscious fear. So you might not see it as the ego is kind of running the show because of the intention seems good, and maybe you haven't peeled back the layers enough. But underneath those layers, when you get to it, you'll see that it's an unconscious fear that actually drives whatever it is. And then you'll see, holy shit, that was ego. So the layers of the ego take time to actually reveal themselves. And that only comes through time. And actually, it only comes through time and like identifying selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear when these crop up. We ask God to remove it, and then talking to somebody. Talking to somebody like that's good at this stuff, they'll reveal that shit to you. And you might not see it at first. Me and Brandon were outside talking, and he was giving me an example of something that someone had said to him some time ago that he didn't like or want to hear and didn't think it was actually true. But then over a year and a half of pondering what that person said, he realized that it was true. And it was a fear-based, but it took a year and a half for you to have the shift, right? And that's kind of what I'm talking about. It takes time sometimes to have the shift because the pride and the concrete wall doesn't really want to like let it in yet. But it will get let in if you keep stripping the layers through your step 10, step 4 type of work. And the unconscious fears are the stuff you can't see. That's actually what runs our lives, is unconscious fears. And how do we change unconscious fears and turn it into like consciousness? Through ceremony, through the rituals, through doing things over and over and over and over. That's really effective to hit the subconscious, which is why most prayers are positive. But when you think of step 11, and a lot of people will only do step 11 and they don't do step 10, the thing about step 10 is step 10 identifies the defective character or the fear. But most people will never really see that because they're just living with the best of intention and they don't notice that. But everyone tries to work a step 11. So when you think about step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry out step 6 and 7. So you're actually asking for the power to carry out His will. Well, His will lies within 6 and 7. 6 is removing your will and trying to gain God's will. And then when you have that shift in 7, then it works better. Okay. subconscious or unconscious fears is the basic breeder of most human difficulties. So whatever your difficulties are that you struggle with, that gives you like the body memory or whatever it is you struggle with, right? Usually it's in the body and you get the erratic emotions that feel like whatever. And it's based in the breeder of fear. That's what causes most of your human difficulties. And our society lives in fear. And what does it say? It's the chief block to true progress. It's the chief block. It blocks everything. Pride lures us into making demands upon ourselves or upon others, which cannot be met without perverting or misusing our God-given instincts. Does anyone know what perverting means?
I do.
What?
Altering from its original course to distortion of what was first intended.
That's exactly what perverted means. Alter its original course or state to a different state. So basically rationalize and justifying something that is a certain way and then shifting it to be something different. So what we'll do is we'll pervert and misuse our instincts. But we don't really see that, and you won't see it unless you peel back layers over time. And then you'll be able to see it over time. When the satisfaction of our instincts for sex, security, society becomes the sole object of our lives, then pride steps in to justify our excesses. All these failings generate fear, a soul sickness in its own right. Then fear in turn generates more character defects. Unreasonable fear that our instincts will not be satisfied drives us to covet the possession of others, to lust for sex and power, and to become angry when our instinctive demands are threatened. I'm going to lose something, I'm not going to get something. It doesn't mean I'm going to lose my truck or I'm not going to get my truck. If I'm going to lose my truck, it's actually, I'm going to lose the identity and what I think I am by owning that truck. And people are going to ask me, oh, where's your truck? Why are you driving this 1976 Kia now? And then my pride just goes, oh, because I lost it, because I couldn't afford it. So then I look bad. I look bad in the eyes of my fellows. But if you're on the right track and you're just like, you know what? I see this truck for what it's worth. It's costing me an arm and a leg. I can't really afford it. And I don't really want the burden of this anymore. And I know who I am. I'm giving the truck up. I'm going to go buy this 1979 Kia. And I'm going to be okay with that. And what do we call that Kia? A humility vehicle. Teaches you humility, man. Right? And so buddy comes up to you and says, where's your truck? Why are you driving this 79 Kia? Dude, I couldn't afford that truck and it was causing me a lot of grief. And I'm really happy with this thing. It runs great. Yeah, it's got 300,000 kilometers, but you know what? I can live. And it's okay, man. And there's so much value in that. Go ahead, Ida. Yeah, I would say fake. Yeah, false evidence appearing real. I would agree with the acronym of fear. And I would also agree with face everything and run, or what is it?
Recover.
What is it? Oh, face everything and recover. Yeah. Yeah, I also agree with that one. Yeah. So that's the difference between like defective character, step 6 type stuff in the first example of the guy who had to give up the truck because he couldn't afford it and it was taken from him. And then he felt like low because he had to acknowledge that he gave the truck up, versus the other guy who gave it up willingly and he's confident in himself. That's the difference between a defect and a shortcoming. But the guy's not even acting in a shortcoming. He's actually acting in God's power. And so that's a huge difference. All it is a mindset. It's the same guy, just 2 different ways of viewing himself. Because we got to change ourselves. And we're okay once we do this work, and we can be like that.
And if we're doing it thoroughly, we open ourselves up to God. creator, universe, whatever you want to call it. But we open ourselves up to that spiritual energy, and it teaches us things. And a prime example, Bill's talking about the truck and the Kia. I'm telling you that when I was in a treatment facility, I had my Harley Davidson still. It was a beautiful airbrush bike. I loved it, and I owed a lot of money. And while my wife was at home selling our holiday trailers and selling off our shit so that she could pay our mortgage so that I could be in treatment, I was still riding around on my Harley Davidson. And I wasn't really wanting to sell it, okay? And then it came a day where I was riding to a meeting over in the barracks, and I left that treatment facility, and I jumped on the bike, and I rode, and I passed these guys, that I thought were going too slow, and I really loud past them to scare them, and then there was a pedestrian that was walking across the crosswalk, I thought a little too slow, so I gave them a crack and scared them, and then I went to turn on from 33rd to Crowchild so that I could go up and get to where I was going, and I thought that the person in front of me was going too slow, so I ripped past him on the right, and as I ripped past him over there, I looked over, and it was a poor little old lady, and she was fucking terrified. And in that moment, God gave me the humility to recognize that I was a fucking asshole on that bike. And I put that bike up for sale that day. And I went 4 years without a Harley Davidson. And, it's not who I am. It is something I love to do, but I had to go 4 years without that bike because I had to work on me. I had to make sure that I wasn't a fucking asshole every time I got on a bike the next time. And you know what? I did some work, and it started working out, and I have a bike again, and I can enjoy it. And I'm not an asshole. My wife likes to get on the bike with me now because I don't race around doing 160, all the time. It's exactly what he's talking about. We get leveled. We have to get leveled. We have to get leveled down so that we can level up, if that makes any sense. And until I open myself up to recognizing these fears, I can't grow.
No, that's good. Thank you, Gord. Okay, let's keep going. To be envious when the ambitions of others seem to be realized and ours are not. How many of us have been there, right? We eat, drink, and grab for more of everything than we need, fearing we shall never have enough. And that's what we do in our world. We grab and grab and grab, thinking that we need to get what's ours. It's actually the opposite. You give and give and give, and you will receive. But that doesn't mean give from the motive of, I just give everything away and I'm going to receive. No, you'll just be poor and fucking homeless. You got to have the mindset, man. You got to have it in you, which I can't really get into. Anyway. And with genuine alarm, the prospect of work, we stay lazy. That's a lot of people in this program. At the prospect of really doing the work, we stay lazy. Because it takes commitment to meet your sponsor every week or twice a week. It takes commitment to put the pen and paper down, and it takes commitment to look at yourself. And instead of just writing down something quick and easy, it takes commitment to really reflect on yourself and see what it is that needs to be on the paper in humility. It takes work, man. But a lot of us will loaf and procrastinate and not really do it. Or at best work grudgingly under half steam. The easier, softer way. These fears, I love this line, are the termites that ceaselessly devour the foundation of the life that we're trying to build. Fears will steal your life, man. And tuning into your fears, and here's a good one, right? 7 layers deep. That's the thing that I talk about all the time. What's the fear? You ask yourself what the fear is in your life. Most of us can only go like 1 or 2 layers because the ego's involved in the first couple layers. But you really want to look at your life in a deep and meaningful sense and find some humility in what I'm talking about. You write down what your fear is, or whatever it is in your life that might be the difficulty, and then you answer the question, why am I fearful of the opposite sex? Or why am I fearful of judgment from my peers? Okay, I'll use that one. Then the answer is because I want to look strong to my peers. So it's my emotional security. I want to look strong. Then it's like, so the next answer becomes the next question. Why do you want to look strong to your peers? Why do you have to? Well, because I don't want to look weak. Okay, why don't you want to look weak? And now you're getting to the 3rd layer, 4th layer. Now you got to go inside and really think about these things. Because we always have an answer on the first 2 or 3 things in our lives, especially the first 2. You're trained. And pride runs the first 2 layers. But as you get down to the middle layers, now it's like, okay, well, why do I not want to look weak? Because weak people get judged. Why are you afraid of being judged? Holy fuck, this is getting real, right? I'm afraid of being judged because I want to live up to what a man's supposed to be. Why do you need to live up to what a man's supposed to be, and maybe what's a man supposed to be? Like now you get down to the nitty gritty and you get to a point where you ain't even coming up with answers. You're going inside and you're asking like your innermost self these questions. And then you're kind of coming up with like, because I don't love myself, or because I don't feel worthy, or because I'm not good enough. And now you're getting real, man. And this is where like real growth happens. And we're talking about humiliation and humbling through pain as humility. Until you acknowledge these deeper innermost concession pieces of yourself, you can't grow out of them. So it's really important to like get good at that stuff. So I call that 7 layers deep. You go down, you go down, you go down. And then you get to a point where you're super vulnerable. We talked about intimacy before. That's into me you see. That's intimacy within yourself. You get that intimate with yourself, and then you bring that to people. You give them the opportunity to do that. You'll have successful relationships because it's real, man. And it's love for yourself. And this whole journey is really about love for yourself. When you can love yourself, you can love other people. That's why I always say in recovery, you'll love yourself in your first year or 2 to whatever degree, but your real self-love doesn't even come till way down the road. Because you couldn't possibly peel that many layers back in the first year. But you're accepting yourself as more like what it is. It's not actually you're really loving yourself, you're accepting yourself. The real love comes down the road as this work kind of continues. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. So when AA suggests fearless moral inventory, it must seem to every newcomer that more is being asked of him that he can do. Both pride and his fear beat him back. Every time he tries to look within himself, pride says you need not pass this way. Pride will always try to stop you from going because it's trying to protect you. The only problem is that it actually kills you. And fear says you dare not look. But the testimony of AAs who have really tried the moral inventory is that pride and fear of this sort turn out to be the boogeyman. Nothing else. Once we have complete willingness, notice how he wrote that. Once we have it, complete willingness to take inventory and exert ourselves to do the job thoroughly. Like this is like fucking heavy lifting, man. This is why I say, there's 2 fellowships in these programs. There's the fellowship of tradition 3. You have a desire not to drink, but that fellowship's huge and it's broad and it's full of fucking sickness, man. And if that's the fellowship you started in, which it was for me, that's great. But the book says, join us in the fellowship of the Spirit. Here you will surely meet some of us. as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. So that's a small fellowship, and that fellowship, that's what these people are actually doing. That's why they're in that fellowship. And so the fellowship you crave will grow up about you. And it actually grows up about you at any level that you're at, because water finds its own level. It just depends where you're at in the scale. And are you willing, right? So water is going to find you. The same like-minded people are going to find you no matter what. And if you're in the fellowship of the Spirit and you're doing this at a high level and you have a real surrender to God, you're going to find those people too. Mm-hmm. And they'll find you. And what will happen is people will be attracted to that. And you'll become what we talk about, like what we're trying to achieve here is spearheads. You guys will become spearheads. And some of us can't believe that people come to us and they are actually asking us questions and they want what we have, because we've never felt like that before. It's almost like you have to step into that. Holy shit. People want what I have, and I have to like step into like being a teacher. So some of you guys in here and ladies, as you go out in there, you're going to be attracting people. And at some point you got to step into that. And what's that? You're stepping into your own self and self-love. And then you're like, then you can be more effective. Because a lot of us don't really see ourselves that way, but it's something that'll probably happen to you. And eventually, when you speak with confidence in what you've learned through your own experience, they fucking really want to learn from you. And then you become like super in tune with like God, because when the student becomes the teacher, fucking it all changes, man. Mm-hmm. But you're always still a student too, right? So... Okay, I'm just going to read a whole bunch. Maybe I'm not. Fuck. A wonderful light falls upon this foggy scene. As we persist, a brand new kind of confidence is born. That's kind of what I was just talking about. And the sense of relief that finally facing ourselves is indescribable. Like that's gold, man. Facing yourself. It's like fucking God dope is all over that shit, man. But it takes that pain, and then the pain is growth. Not looking, pain is still there, but it's unremitting, and it's suffering. These are the first fruits of step 4. By now, the newcomer, so I've read this many times in this study. This is an important line, especially for anyone new. By now, the newcomer has probably arrived at the following conclusion: that character defects representing instincts gone astray have been the primary number one cause of his drinking and failure at life. And it's actually the opposite. The character defects that are representative of the instinct, actually, when you act that way, you cause failure at life. You cause a failure within yourself, so then you need to drink because you're dishonoring yourself. So it's kind of the opposite. Unless he is now willing to work hard at the elimination of the worst of these defects, any person capable of enough willingness and honesty to try repeatedly step 6 on all his faults without reservation has indeed come a long way spiritually. You get closer to God. So unless you're willing to work hard at the elimination of these defects, both sobriety and peace of mind will still elude him. Sobriety will elude you if you don't look at these things and work on them. But first you have to see what they are. And first you have to understand step 1. They will still elude him. That all the faulty foundation of his life will have to be torn out and built upon a new bedrock. Okay, what's the faulty foundation of life? Anyone? What's the root of our trouble? Self. When you look at your life and you see the foundation of your life, it's based on self-centered fear. So that's what we're trying to remove. And then we build on a new bedrock. So in the We Agnostic chapter, it talked about upon this simple cornerstone. Am I willing to believe, or do I believe? Well, I do believe. Or maybe it was less, I'm just fucking willing to believe. Upon that simple cornerstone of being willing or believing, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. So you can have that, but it's not just enough to just believe. Learning how to turn it over, which is the step 3 keystone locked in, is actually where the fucking gold is. Learning that, how to turn it over. But first you got to learn what's not God, what's fear. That's why we're spending so much time on this stuff. So you can identify the problem of self, not do that, and leave the results up to God. Because most of the time when we act in fear, we're trying to predict an outcome in our lives for security. But there's no security in that. Really, where security comes is your ability to navigate that with your Creator and learn how to get through it and grow through it. That's where security comes from. And then what'll happen is your security is right there. Fucking wherever it is. That's your security. Good or bad. It's fucking God's will, man. It's going to be seemingly good. Great. It's God. Seemingly bad. Shit, this sucks. What's God teaching me? But then you're not going wallowing into emotionalism and fucking being a victim of erratic emotion. You're just like, fuck, okay, I need to learn the lesson here, right?
And that all starts, I just want to add, Bill, and I love that he brought step 2 into this, because it absolutely, if you go back to page 30 in this 12 by 12, it talks about how we start to learn that cornerstone. And it says right here, we found many in AA who once thought as we did. They helped us to get down to our right size. By their example, they showed us that humility and intellect could be compatible, provided we placed humility first. That is the start. That's the start. It starts telling us that we need to find humility at the very beginning of this design for living. Step 2. And Bill has got it exactly right. But that's where we start learning. And when we start doing the work in 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, that starts to become a part of. Why? Because we start to rely on our higher power. It starts to fill us.
Okay, I'll just finish this and I'll turn it over to Gord. Now willing to commence the search for his own defects, he will ask, just how do I go about this? How do I take inventory for myself? Give her, Gord.
All right, I got nothing to add other than what I already did, so here's yours. Since step 4 is but the beginning of a lifetime practice, that sounds familiar. Step 10, it can be suggested that he first have a look at those personal flaws which are acutely troublesome. So what are the worst ones? What are causing me the most problems? We talked about this when we discussed step 4, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but we start to look for common manifestations, right? You remember we talked about that? Common manifestations, what are those? Simply patterns in our life that we failed. We look at our lives in step 4, and when we've written all this stuff down, and we look, then we focus on and try and think about the times we failed in our lives and see where the patterns are. And when we start to see where the patterns are, we want to get rid of the ones that are acutely troublesome, the big ones. My anger, my violent nature, you know, my insecurity and need to be liked. That shit caused me all sorts of problems. That's insecurity, by the way, that I covered up with anger and violence. You start to learn more later, but it's all, the acute ones is where we start. The really troublesome ones. The fairly obvious ones. Using his best judgment of what has been right and what has been wrong, he might make a rough survey of his conduct with respect to his primary instincts for sex, security, and society. Looking back over his life, he can readily get underway by consideration of questions such as these. When and how, so this is going to tell us how to look at it closer, right? When and how, in just what instances did my selfish pursuit of the sex relation damage other people and me? So now I'm, again, looking at patterns in my life, right? Common manifestations it talks about in step 4 in the big book. What people were hurt and how badly? Did I spoil my marriage and injure my children? Did I jeopardize my standing in the community? Just how did I react to these situations at the time? Excuse me. Did I burn with a guilt that nothing could extinguish? Or did I insist that I was the pursued and not the pursuer and thus absolve myself? How have I reacted to frustration in sexual matters? When denied, did I become vengeful or depressed? Did I take it out on other people? If there was rejection or coldness at home, did I use this as a reason for promiscuity? Is anyone recognizing that this is exactly what Bill just talked about when he was talking about the 7 layers? This is what we need to do. We need to dig deeper. Because when we started this step 6 thing, we started talking about the roots that grew underground and how those roots grew across each other and combined with each other. And so when I'm looking at an anger reaction, it actually has more to do with fear, and it has more to do with selfish, behaviors and pride, and it all gets entangled, and it's not just one defect of character. So this is actually taking us through a way, which Bill so eloquently described as this 7-layer program, which I love, by the way. I wrote it down myself so I can remember that. This is the same idea. Ask the questions. Don't ask the first question. What's the first question? Did I jeopardize my standing in the community? Or were people hurt? That was the first question. Were people hurt? Well, I could say, yeah, maybe. Yeah, some people got hurt. But how much am I going to learn about myself just knowing I hurt people? I mean, I hurt a lot of people. But I have to start going on and asking more questions, going deeper into the roots and finding out where they cross, finding out what has meshed and acts together and becomes more common manifestations in my life. What has become more simple patterns that have caused me to fail. This is a hard thing to do. They put it down in a paragraph, but man, this has so far been 9 years of me working at it. And I'm going to just keep working because I haven't uncovered but a skiff of it. Also of importance for most alcoholics are the questions they must ask about their behavior respecting financial and emotional security. In these areas, fear, greed, possessiveness, and pride have too often done their worst. So I'm going to keep going because this is about the same stuff. It's all about asking the deeper questions. Surveying his business or employment record, almost any alcoholic can ask questions like these. In addition to my drinking problem, what character defects contributed to my financial instability? Did fear and inferiority about my fitness for my job destroy my confidence and fill me with conflict? Did I try to cover up those feelings of inadequacy by bluffing, cheating, lying, or evading responsibility? I would like to add in there, did I even become willing enough to admit to myself that I felt inadequate? Because I'll tell you something, maybe, there's people that can do that very easily. I know for tough guys, that have the tattoos and work out and we're tough guys. It's hard to admit, man, that I'm insecure, that I feel inadequate. But this is the growth that's needed. If us men are going to become real men, if us girls are going to become real women, right? It's all a part of it. I'll keep going because we're running out of time, I know.
We're going to go to 9:15 though, and we'll finish this chapter, just FYI.
Okay. Did I try to cover up those feelings of inadequacy, bluffing, cheating, lying, or evading responsibility? Or by griping that others failed to recognize my truly exceptional abilities? In other words, did I feel sorry for myself instead? Did I overvalue myself and play the big shot? Ego. Did I have such unprincipled ambition that I double-crossed and undercut my associates? Dishonesty. Ego. Was I extravagant? Arrogance. Ego. Did I recklessly borrow money, caring little whether it was repaid or not? Dishonesty, selfishness, self-centeredness. Was I a pinch penny, refusing to support my family properly? Selfishness. Fear. Did I cut corners financially? What about the quick money deals, the stock market, and the races? Businesswomen in AA will naturally find that many of these questions apply to them too. But the alcoholic housewife can also make the family financially insecure. She can juggle charge accounts and manipulate the food budget, spend her afternoons gambling, and run her husband into debt by irresponsibility, waste, and extravagance. Amazon orders, Visa cards.
Who's laughing? We know you're guilty.
I hope, we got to bring it to today's day and age, right? But it's a reality. Man, I come home and just about every day there's a new Amazon package on my doorstep. I chuckle, but, we're not in the poorhouse, I promise. But that can be something that we fall into, right? But all alcoholics who have drank themselves out of jobs, family, and friends will need to cross-examine themselves ruthlessly to determine their own personality defects, have thus demolished their security. In other words, we have to look at our common manifestations in order to figure out where our shortcomings are, where our defects of characters are glaring and causing us pain, and the people around us pain. The most common symptoms of emotional insecurity are worry, anger, self-pity, and depression. These stem from causes which sometimes seem to be within us, and at other times to come from without. To take inventory in this respect, we ought to consider carefully all personal relationships which bring continuous or recurring trouble, or, I have it written down here again, common manifestations or patterns. It should be remembered that this kind of insecurity may arise in any area where instincts are threatened. That is a really important sentence. Anywhere that fear takes over. Questioning directed to this end might run like this. More 7-layer stuff. Looking at both past and present, what sex situations have caused me anxiety, bitterness, frustration, or depression? Appraising each situation fairly, can I see where I've been at fault? That's the beginning. Did these perplexities beset me because of selfishness or unreasonable demands? So what are the motives, right? Or if my disturbance was seemingly caused by the behavior of others, why do I lack the ability to accept, and this one's a big one for me, why do I lack the ability to accept conditions I cannot change? These are the sort of fundamental inquiries that can disclose the source of my discomfort and indicate whether I may be able to alter my own conduct and so adjust myself serenely to self-discipline. And I love the way that Bill put that. The answer becomes the next question. It's such an easy way to do that. Thanks, brother. Suppose that financial insecurity constantly arouses these same feelings. I can ask myself, to what extent have my own mistakes fed my gnawing anxieties? And if the actions of others are part of the cause, what can I do about that? If I am unable to change the present state of affairs, am I willing to take the measures necessary to shape my life to conditions as they are? Questions like these, more of which will come to mind easily in each individual case, will help turn up the root causes. But it is from our twisted relations with family, friends, and society at large that many of us have suffered the most.
Boom.
Learned behaviors. We aren't at fault, but we are now responsible. We have been especially stupid and stubborn about them. The primary fact that we fail to recognize is our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. Our egomania digs two disastrous pitfalls. Either we insist upon dominating the people we know, or we depend upon them far too much. Does anyone like Van Halen?
No.
Jeez, you guys are terrible. I love Van Halen. They wrote a song called Humans Being. I love that song. We're all just humans being. Unfortunately, so many of us, most of us, have learned behaviors that drive us. So it's hard to have a true partnership with another human being or another human's being. There's nothing I can do to change other people. This becomes about me getting in touch with me. And then I open myself up to true relationships, friendships, relationships. If we lean too heavily on people, they will sooner or later fail us. This is fear, for they are human too and cannot possibly meet our incessant demands. In this way, our insecurity grows and festers, or our fear drives more defects of character. When we habitually try to manipulate others to our own willful desires, anyone relate to that? Yeah, me too.
Manipulate, mind and emotional blackmail.
Yeah, exactly.
In various different ways. Slam a door. I didn't slam a door. If I can give them a look, say something with a tone.
Don't say anything.
Don't say anything. Like, there's so many ways that these things come to, that we never noticed before, right?
Yeah. Then we develop hurt feelings, a sense of persecution, and a desire to retaliate. Again, now we're back to self-pity. As we redouble our efforts at control and continue to fail, our suffering becomes acute and constant. See, there's a reason in step 11 that it tells me to pause when agitated or doubtful and to ask God for the right next thought, right? And if it doesn't come immediately, it also says, go about your day, man. It'll come, right? When I start to force it, it causes harm.
And it also says we may pay for these presumption and all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. So we may screw it up and we'll pay for it. But if we're awake enough, we'll see the humility in it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We have not once sought to be one in a family, to be a friend among friends, to be a worker among workers, to be a useful member of society. Does everybody understand what that is saying? I'm going to speak about me. Not once in my life before I found recovery and started actually working the principles in my life did I ever want to just be Gord Pritchard in my family, just the oldest brother. I always wanted to sit at the head of the table, and I always wanted to give advice to this brother, and I always wanted to go first and get the wishbone and do the things, and I wanted to be the guy. I wanted to be the best big brother and the best uncle. I couldn't be comfortable with just being their uncle and your brother and your son, even Keel. And the same goes for among workers, to be a worker among workers. I always wanted to outwork everybody. It was very important that I became the top-selling project manager in the company, and to brag about that when I did. Useful member of society. What is that? What is that? Well, it's what I am today. It's why I'm here tonight. This is me being a useful member of society, is to give selflessly. But you can see how our whole lives, my whole life, was about being bigger and better than everything and everyone around me. And I could never just be level. That's what that means. Everyone feeling me on that? Cool. This, always we try to struggle to the top of the heap or to hide underneath it. This self-centered, again, that's either depressive or egotistical, right? It's the two opposites. This self-centered behavior blocked a partnership relation with any one of those about us. Of true brotherhood, we had small comprehension. Some will object to many of the questions posed because they think their own character defects have not been so glaring. Oh, it's not that bad. I had no idea how glaring my defects of character were until I did a step 4. And then I had no idea what to do about it. To these, it can be suggested that a conscientious examination is likely to reveal the very defects the objectionable questions are concerned with. Because our surface record hasn't looked too bad, we have frequently been abashed to find that this is so simply because we have buried these self-same defects deep down in us under thick layers of self-justification. I can't totally relate to this. I guess I can when I was younger trying to get sober, but I just leveled my life. So it wasn't hard for me to recognize I had glaring defects. But for some people, I know some people. I got a guy in this room right now that I sponsored who runs he runs a business with his family, and he's done quite well. He's raising his son responsibly and very well. So it's harder for guys like that to see their glaring defects. And it takes some good conversations, I think, if you recall, to get to the bottom of it. And we ask the questions. I love this 7-layer thing. We ask those questions until it finally, you can see. You ever hear people talk about loving sponsoring because you get to see the light come on in another person's eyes? That's what I'm talking about. When they start to go, holy shit, I didn't think I was that bad. But I see it. I was selfish in everything I did. I was fearful of everything. I always feel self-pity. That's the light coming on, and there's a relief in it. Whatever the defects they have finally ambushed us into alcoholism and misery. Their fault, oh man. Therefore, thoroughness ought to be the watchword when taking inventory. In this connection, it is wise to write out our questions and answers. It will be an aid to clear thinking and honest appraisal. It will be the first tangible evidence of our complete willingness to move forward. And so what that means is you need to write out your step 4, and you need to start answering. In that 4th column, you need to start writing down the questions and the answers, and the next question and the answer, and the next question and the answer. That is thorough. That is being thorough. And what happens is I then can actually recognize in myself a willingness to try, a willingness to do a thorough job. Go ahead.
Okay, I won't talk much, but I do want to touch on a couple things. Top of 53. But it is from our twisted relations with family, friends, and society at large that many of us have suffered the most. And so if you have developed your defective character with your friends and family, and you expect to fix them in the same environment that they got fucked up in, good luck. Right? That doesn't happen. It's like when you go to get sober and you come back to the exact same environment that you left to get sober, you usually, almost 99% of the time, you drink and use drugs again. Because nothing's changed and nothing will change, and it takes time to change anything. And going away for 2 or 3 months and coming back to the same place with the same environment, whether it be family, friends, and all these things, you usually drink again. So for us, if we really want to grow and change, we can't get that from our family and friends who we've taught to treat us that way, and we've taught to treat them the way they are treating, right? So we need to level up and do this differently with other people who are good at this, or who at least care more about our lives than our feelings, like the person who said what they said to Brandon a year and a half ago, and she said it straight up. Took him a year and a half for it to sink in, but it was a huge piece, in my opinion, of his whole spiritual awakening. But it didn't come right when it was said. It came down the road, right? But that was because he put himself in the environment of somebody that cared more about. And then the thing about those things is, from somebody in pride and ego, they'd be like, fuck, that's really nasty to say to him. Why would you say that? That's ego and pride. The difference between ego and pride is her motive was pure love. It looked like pride and ego to somebody living in pride and ego, but that somebody that knows it is love, and that's why he thought about it for a year and a half, because it pierced his pride, because the love always pierces pride, right? So we have to use other people who are conducive to our recovery and the environments that we're trying to recover in. And really, recovery means the process of getting well from an illness or an injury. We have a spiritual injury, spiritual illness. So we need to recover from those. Hence, we never drink or use drugs again. That's exactly what this whole study's been about. And the last thing I'll talk about is the line under that. The primary fact. So Bill W.'s literature, and he's saying this in one spot right here. The primary number one fact that we will not recognize is our total inability to form a true partnership with any other human being. Wow. When I did my first step 4, because I always thought I was pretty nice and kind and caring and giving and all these things, when I finished my step 4, I was like, holy fuck. Yeah. I never had a relationship with anyone in my life except with myself. Right? And that didn't work out very well, did it, Shannon? That's my ex-wife.
Oh, hey. Thought I recognized you.
Myself destroyed my life. I never had a relationship with anyone else, really. I wasn't a worker among workers. I wasn't a family among families. I was the guy who was like, do it my way or get the fuck out. But it didn't really work out for me, right? Because it took, I'll finish with this. Whatever defects they have finally ambushed us into misery. Alcoholism and misery. That's what my defects did. It ambushed me into misery. And I know many people in this world who their defects, and they're not alcoholics and addicts, their defects ambush them into misery. And think about that, ambush. It's like you don't really see the ambush. And then it's misery. And to come out of that misery is very difficult. So anyway, that was a good sesh. Thank you very much.